Since Hugo Chávez was elected to power in 1998, descriptions of how decisions are made in Venezuela have varied greatly. Sympathizers of the socialist movement point to a network of community organizations, arguing that Chávez is but channeling the will of a new grassroots democracy. Meanwhile, the North American discourse tends to describe Chávez as an anti-democratic force.
We have been concerned with some of the actions of Venezuelan President Chávez and his understanding of what a democratic system is all about.
Not just to deal with Russia, but to deal with many of the rogue states we've talked about, Iran, Venezuela.
Victoria heroica de la oposición, heroica porque enfrentó a una dictadura abusiva, matonesca.
President Hugo Chávez trying to keep his job forever. He's asking for a constitutional amendment that would let him seek indefinite re-election. That's what happens when you're a dictator. Chávez was first elected back in 1998, elected in quotations.
As plunging oil prices force Venezuela to make tough decisions regarding its priorities, what is this crisis teaching us about Venezuelan democracy?
I think that this is a process that still needs to unfold. This is the distinction between participatory democracy and representative democracy. Venezuela had until before the Chávez government had largely representative democracy, much what the rest of the world has in the Western sense, that is, that the representatives make decisions. Participatory democracy opens up a whole other arena in which actual communities and communal power and unions can actually be making decisions in terms of priorities. That's still a process that's unfolding. There is still a tension between the party structure, the party officials, and many of these social movements and progressive movements who are beginning to do that. Then they also confront the challenges of the municipal authorities, because municipal authorities, even if they're Chavistas, resent giving up part of their power. And that's part of the discourse here, is that there's a thrush on the part of the federal government to empower those local movements, to empower those communal organizations. And that's part of the challenge here in ensuring that that kind of two-way street takes place. And I think it's begun, but it still has some way to go.
From what you can tell, what are the priorities that these community groups are putting at the top of the list?
What we've seen is the commitment to maintain the whole infrastructure of support system, the support network of education and health service and delivery and food subsidies and food programs. We've seen those kind of issues being prioritized over things such as the regional infrastructure for gas pipelines. I think those will simply be shelved for the time being.
Chávez recently initiated a second campaign to amend the Venezuelan constitution in order to allow him to run for re-election in 2012. Critics, including many who share Chávez's social agenda, have pointed to the removal of term limits as a threat to Venezuelan democracy. If Chávez's revolution is about empowering the grassroots, why is it that Chávez himself needs to stay on as leader? In theory, the leader wouldn't matter in that situation.
There's a dynamic here between leadership and change. And it's not just a dynamic in Venezuela, it's a dynamic in Brazil, it's a dynamic in Bolivia, it's a dynamic in Ecuador, and throughout Latin America. And that's part of this tension between leadership who can actually gel the massive.
Porque sabemos que como el presidente Chávez no vamos a tener otro presidente aquí, el único presidente que ha transformado el país, y no solamente aquí, su transformación ha llegado más allá.
Invariably, mass movements don't simply function at the level of collectives, they function at the level of leaderships also. And Chávez has become the symbol of this process. There are many who would like to see Chávismo without Chávez. There are many in the Chavista movement that propose that. It still has not come to pass, and the reality is that this movement still needs a spearhead, and Chávez has, one way or another, has come to represent that. So that there is a proposal before the National Assembly to amend Constitution, allowing now not just the president, but allowing also governors, mayors, representatives, and municipal authorities to also seek re-election. Electoral polls indicate that Chávez would win. If he doesn't, what really is at play is Chavismo. If he's defeated, they will have to find a new candidate for the 2012 election, and at this point there is not a single individual who can fill that role or has filled that role. The closest person would be Jorge Rodriguez, who won the mayorship of part of Caracas, but that's been the only person. What is at play in Venezuela and in the referendum in February of 2009 will be the future of the Chavista movement in Venezuela to a certain extent. And in many ways, the role of the left in Latin America. A loss for Chávez in this election in Venezuela would all have tremendous repercussions, since Chávez was among the first Latin American leftist leaders to be elected in 1998, and I think it would change the course of action throughout the region as well.
The first time Chávez sought to remove the presidential term limit, along with 68 other constitutional amendments, The referendum was defeated. You mentioned it is likely to pass this time. What has changed?
I think the mistake in the 207 referendum was something like this. You mentioned 60 additional constitutional changes, from geopolitical arrangements to how power was to be distributed, to the 6-hour day. And then Chávez was off in Colombia negotiating for the FARC release, and then he was off in Paris, and he wasn't paying attention to what was going on here. I mean, he did this on the heels of being reelected by a strong, large majority, and they did not pay attention to what they were doing. I think here you see only one issue on the ballot. There were 3 polls that came out this last weekend, 2 of which indicated that 60% of the population, or even higher, continue to approve of Chávez in power, and that over 50% would vote for the referendum.